Wide receivers early or wide receivers late? It doesn't matter. Whatever your philosophy is come this draft season, I've got 3 must-have wide receivers for you today that I'm doing anything possible to walk away from my drafts with. I've got a guy you won't be shocked about. I've got a guy that just doesn't get enough respect. And I've got another guy going under the radar that you certainly need to be taking a deeper look at. And the best part about these 3 wide receivers is you can have all 3 of them on your team. Now, you may have to draft a little heavy on the wide receivers to start in order to get all 3 guys, but you don't have to take all 3. Maybe you just take 2, or you just end up investing in 1. But whatever your draft philosophy is, all 3 of these guys can be had on the same team at the right price. And at the top of the list is going to be my boy Amon-Ra St. Brown, currently with an ADP of 7.3 and the wide receiver 5 overall to begin draft season. Amon-Ra St. Brown was top 5 in most volume categories last season. He ended up being top 5 in receptions, in receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns. Now, he was tied for 6th in targets, but that just shows how efficient Amon-Ra St. Brown can be. 6th in targets, and then he ends up going into the top 5 for both receptions and receiving yards. Now, Amon-Ra St. Brown isn't known as a big play threat. He does make some big plays, but as you can see, it isn't a big part of his game. Now, big play receptions and big play yards are defined as plays that were on targets of 20 or more yards down the field. So while he may have caught a target 9 yards away from the line of scrimmage, it doesn't equate into this because the target itself wasn't 20 or more yards down the field. Now, this metric I'm okay with because this isn't St. Brown's game anyway. Because Amon-Ra St. Brown is a guy that can move all over the formation, whether it be on the outside or from the slot. And from the slot is where Amon-Ra St. Brown is by far the most dangerous. And last season from the slot, he was 2nd in targets, receptions, receiving yards, and receiving yards after the catch. He also had 8 contested catches out of the slot, the most among any wide receiver. And he also forced 10 missed tackles from the slot, tied for 3rd among wide receivers. Now, the reason that these numbers are super important is because side by side with one of the top wide receivers in all of football, you see how close Amon-Ra St. Brown is to being absolutely elite, if you don't already consider him that anyway. Because while I understand that Amon-Ra St. Brown is the wide receiver 5 and being taken towards the back end of the 1st round, his numbers compared next to CeeDee Lamb are pretty darn close. When you put CeeDee Lamb's numbers right next to Amon-Ra St. Brown, you realize that these guys were competing for the top spot in most slot categories last year. St. Brown was only 1 reception behind CeeDee Lamb. Now, CeeDee Lamb did have quite a few more receiving yards out of the slot than what Amon-Ra St. Brown did, and that kind of goes back to the fact that CeeDee Lamb has a little bit of a bigger upside because he's more of a big play threat, but then yards after the catch, 351 for St. Brown, 358 for CeeDee Lamb. It was only 7 less. CeeDee Lamb had 2 less contested catches than what Amon-Ra St. Brown did, and he only forced 1 missed tackle more than what Amon-Ra St. Brown did. So while I agree that yes, CeeDee Lamb does deserve to go above Amon-Ra St. Brown because of his big playability and because really he's the main and only target on that team outside of Jake Ferguson, maybe we should be giving Amon-Ra St. Brown a little bit more credit than what we are as a big playmaker in the NFL. But there's also a few other CeeDee Lamb comparisons as well that we should really be keeping an eye on when we take a look at overall numbers and not just numbers from the slot. Because Amon-Ra St. Brown only had 21 fewer targets and 16 fewer receptions than Lamb. And he only had 234 fewer receiving yards and only 2 fewer touchdowns. But Amon-Ra St. Brown did have 1 more 100-yard game than what CeeDee Lamb did. And then on top of that, when you take a look at their yards per reception, Amon-Ra St. Brown was only 0.23 yards per reception behind CeeDee Lamb. And you know what would have made these numbers even closer? Amon-Ra St. played one less game than CeeDee Lamb last season. Would he have touched CeeDee Lamb in terms of overall volume? Probably not. He probably still would have been behind CeeDee Lamb in quite a few of these categories, but things would have been a lot closer. And Amon-Ra St. is one of the toughest players in all of football. He had to miss that game last season, but if you haven't caught the receiver documentary over on Netflix as of yet, you would be shocked at how many injuries he played through last season and just how banged up he was. Most players would have missed significant time. Amon-Ra St. missed one game. He's absolutely on my draft list this year. And if you miss out on Tyreek Hill or CeeDee Lamb, Amon-Ra St. may be the next best option and the safest wide receiver option in all of fantasy football. And I do want to say quickly, if you love these deep diving numbers and you want to get the opportunity to touch base with Jake and I on a one-on-one basis more often, I would recommend becoming a member here on YouTube today, and it's super easy to do. All you need to do is hit that blue join button right below the video. We have several different tiers that you can join, ranging in prices from $5, $10 to $20. And the higher you go, the more access you're going to get to myself, Jake, the rest of the Headliner team, and of course, Headliner Nation. The amount of in-season content that is exclusive to members is actually insane. Every single week of the season, we'll do flex rankings, kicker rankings, and defensive special teams rankings. You're gonna get in-season exclusive film breakdowns to see, should we panic on people or should we be buying them right now? And an extra members-only live stream on Sunday mornings that is only available to you so you can get all the questions that you need answered. And if you join our excessive Chubb tier, which is only $20 a month, you're gonna get unlimited access to our exclusive Discord that's only for members, including a ticketing system that allows you to talk one-on-one with Jake and myself so we can personally help you with all of your fantasy questions. Or maybe you need dating advice, or maybe you need help with your diet or buying a new car. Hey, hey, we'll help you with that too. But take a look at all the perks in our memberships down below and really consider becoming a member today, especially for in-season content. It's well worth it. It really feels like that Mike Evans is having one of the best wide receiver careers of all time that no one really talks about. 1,000 receiving yards every single season since he entered the league, and touchdown-wise, he's had some up and down years, but last year, he was back to scoring those touchdowns, and a lot of people didn't see it coming, with the Bake Show being the guy in Tampa Bay. And Tampa Bay not only got a deal done with Baker Mayfield to bring him back as the starter, but it also helped them bring back Mike Evans as well. Evans said that he looked at other teams like the Kansas City Chiefs and Houston Texans, and in the end decided that he wanted to stay in Tampa Bay. Some of it because he loves Tampa Bay and he wants to be there. But if he didn't know Baker Mayfield was coming back and he didn't feel that connection with them, I'm sure he would have went looking elsewhere. Mike Evans has always been a guy that seems to do a whole lot more with a whole lot less. Targets and reception wise, he's never really been a huge volume type of player, but receiving yards and receiving touchdowns, every single year he seems to be a candidate for being near the top of those categories. He was 18th in targets and tied for 18th in receptions this year, but he ended up being 9th in receiving yards and tied for 1st with Tyreek Hill in receiving touchdowns. And of course, the big plays were there. His big play receptions, again, receptions that were on targets of 20 or more yards, was tied for 4th in the league, while his big play receiving yards were 3rd. And just to expand on how good he is down the field, take a look at his overall numbers on targets 20 or more yards down the field last year. He had 34 targets 20 or more yards down the field, 3rd most in the NFL. But then his target percentage, 26.8% of his overall targets were 20 or more yards down the field. That was the 2nd most in all the NFL. Mike Evans was truly a deep threat last season for Tampa Bay. And out of the 13 touchdowns he had last season, 7 of them came on those targets 20 or more yards down the field. Second in the NFL. And on those targets, he was tied for 5th with 100 yards after the catch. So it wasn't like he was just catching the ball and going down. He was catching the ball and making moves afterwards. But I think sometimes people take a look at Mike Evans and feel like he's a one-trick pony, or maybe he's not doing everything that needs to be done to be a legitimate top wide receiver, and I really don't agree with that. And even though Mike Evans continues to be a beast playmaker down the field, I don't think he gets enough love for how efficient he is as well. He was number 1 this past season in average depth of target, and he ended up being 6th in yards per reception. In addition to that, his 0.33 points per snap last season were tied for 9th among wide receivers. His 3.58 points per touch was the highest among wide receivers as well. Mike Evans is going in a great spot this season. His ADP of 31 overall is going to give you an absolute discount later in the 3rd round, and it allows you to be very flexible with how you draft as well. Because if you go wide receiver in the 1st round, follow it up with the running back, and then Mike Evans is an amazing wide receiver too. Then you just need to make sure you're hitting the running backs after that. Maybe you decide to go running back heavy in the first 2 rounds. Mike Evans in the 3rd round is still a fantastic wide receiver 1, and you would still have a shot in the later rounds at this guy now. I would be willing to bet when you clicked on this video, you didn't think that I was gonna name Rashee Rice as one of my must-have wide receivers for 2024. And I know that there is a lot of question marks surrounding what's gonna happen with him with a potential suspension this season. But right now, his overall ADP puts him at 92 as the wide receiver 37. Let me preface this by saying nobody at the Fantasy Headliners is a legal expert, and I'm certainly not placing judgment on anybody. I'm not a court, I'm not a judge. That's not what we're talking about today. We do judge people, however, on their potential fantasy football output. So it's important to know what could potentially be happening with Rashee Rice in his legal battles right now. Now, we do have a valued member of our community who has been a moderator for us for several seasons. Her name is Anna, and for her actual job, she has had to brush up on some legal studies as well. So over the last couple of years, when there have been some different legal things within the NFL, we have asked for her opinion on it. During the Alvin Kamara issue, she gave us a lot of feedback towards different things that she was seeing from a legal standpoint. Again, she's not a lawyer, she's not a legal expert, but based on what we've discussed with her, it doesn't seem like there's anything on the horizon for Rashee Rice that would lead to a suspension right now. From a criminal standpoint, there's not much of anything that is actually public right now, but he does have 2 civil cases, with one potentially going to trial as early as the end of December. Now, at any point in time, he could be indicted on criminal charges. And if that were to happen and he demands a speedy trial, it would start approximately 120 days after the indictment took place. Which means as of this recording, the trial couldn't even start until January 20th. So as of right now, unless the NFL decides to act before any type of legal battle proceeds, Rashee Rice is going to be playing football this season. So I'll say it again. None of us are legal experts. We're just using the information that we currently have to try and help you all make a decision on Rashee Rice this season. The one thing I will remind everybody of, it could change at a moment's notice. The NFL has shown in the past that they're going to not make a suspension public until they see something happen with the actual legal process playing out. So right now, Rashee Rice seems to be in the clear from facing any type of a long-term suspension that would keep him out of your lineup. Okay, but enough of the legal jargon. Let's actually talk about the football part of this. And last season, Rashee Rice, he didn't have the greatest numbers in the world. From a volume perspective, Rashee Rice didn't even crack the top 15 in any categories last season. And from a big play perspective, he barely made it inside the top 100. But there are a couple of different areas where Rashee Rice excelled, and that's what we need to be thinking about this season. Now, last year from the slot, Rashee Rice had some pretty solid numbers. He was 18th in targets, 13th in reception, and 12th in receiving yards out of the slot. But he was also tied for third with 5 touchdowns from the slot last season as well. And another interesting stat for you as well, he averaged 4.2 yards of separation per reception last season. That was third best among all players in the NFL, not just wide receivers. Any player that worked out of the slot, that is where he ranked. So we know that he did work in the slot last season, and that the Kansas City Chiefs brought in Xavier Worthy and Marquise Brown to sit on the outside. There is going to be a lot of one-on-one coverage out of the slot where Rashee Rice is going to be matched up against smaller nickel corners. But last season, towards the end of the year, we saw him start to put together some pretty big numbers for fantasy owners. From week 12 through week 17, he scored 89 fantasy points, which made him the wide receiver 6 during that span in half PPR leagues. He also ended up finishing 5th in targets, 2nd in receptions, and 4th in receiving yards. And this was his overall production. This wasn't just out of the slot. He was also heavily utilized during this stretch of games by the Kansas City Chiefs in the red zone. He ended up being tied for 6th in red zone targets, and he was tied for 3rd in red zone receptions. And then on his points per snap basis during this time, he was tied for 6th. Rashee Rice is going outside the top 36 wide receivers right now. So depending on how you draft, Rashee Rice could end up being a guy that you pick up as a wide receiver 3 or a wide receiver 4. Now here's the great thing about that. Typically when you spend a draft pick on a wide receiver 3 or a wide receiver 4, it ends up being a crapshoot anyway. A lot of those guys further down the list, you're hoping to hit on some of them because there's nobody that's super established or consistent in that area anyway. So is there anybody around Rashee Rice that you would invest in that would offer you more consistency than what he does, that also wouldn't be just as a big of a risk as Rashee Rice would be if he were to be suspended? If Rashee Rice was being drafted as a high-end wide receiver 2, heck no, a low-end wide receiver 2, still wouldn't do it. Even a high-end wide receiver 3, I would probably say, no, not worth it. But Rashee Rice is going outside the top 36 wide receivers. At his current ADP, he's well worth the risk, knowing that the Kansas City Chiefs are going to have all the speed on the outside once again, Travis Kelce over the middle, and Rashee Rice facing those nickel corners that he absolutely can beat on a consistent basis. And the run game should be solid for them this year as well. Headliner Nation, there you have it. 3 of my must-have wide receivers for the 2024 season. Hopefully you all appreciated this video, and if you did, hit the like button for me. But the YouTube algorithm right now is telling us that like 30% of the people that watch our videos religiously actually aren't even subscribed to the channel. If you're one of those people, I need you to hit subscribe right now. But make sure you leave me a comment down below and let me know which one of these wide receivers you feel most comfortable drafting at their current ADP. Of course, everyone's gonna take Amon-Ra St. Brown over these other 2 guys, but maybe you don't love his ADP. Maybe you don't even like Mike Evans' ADP. Maybe you're gonna take the biggest risk of them all and go with Rashee Rice, and your wide receiver 1, 2, or even 3 would be different. But don't forget, depending on how you draft, you could have all 3 of these guys on your team together. Headliner Nation, that's gonna do it for me. Have a great day, stay safe, and stay healthy, and I'll catch you all on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.